The third Dusk Star from Night in the Woods is Sterling the Seer. You can find out about Sterling by visiting Mr. Chazakov's roof on day 6, or the third day of the Weird Autumn chapter. A seer is a person who claims to have special insight, usually through magical or mystical means. Appropriately, Sterling was the advisor to a king, and he taught him all he knew about the stars. However, all of his knowledge about the cosmos was based on what he'd learned through the use of these supposedly supernatural powers, and unfortunately, the legend told to us by Mr. Chazakov implies that Sterling was wrong. Because eventually, an astronomer came to the kingdom and taught the king an entirely different method of understanding the stars. Again, judging from the name, we can assume that the astronomer's methods were more scientific, and in all likelihood, more accurate. And thus, the king kicked Sterling out of his court. It's a sad tale, but I'm sure it was a fairly common one for this time period. Many of the myths that are attached to the Dusk Stars seem to be set in roughly the Renaissance, a time period where there was a great deal of clashing between eras, between religion and science, between feudal hierarchies and more modern societal structures. We see that here with Sterling. He represented an older, outdated way of thinking, and once it was no longer the accepted way of doing things, he was cast aside. Out with the old, in with the new. While we're on the topic, I can't help but wonder if the king mentioned in this story is King Behren, from the myth of Doer the Murderer. I don't think Mr. Chazakov's Dusk Stars are as linked as, say, the MCU, but I'm sure there are connections to be found, and I wouldn't be surprised if King Behren was one of them. Following up on this, a connection I find to be much more likely is the one presented here, in this awesome piece of art by Scruff Bucket, who is kind enough to allow me to use it as the thumbnail image for this video. In the piece, Scruff Bucket suggests that Adina Astra was the astronomer who taught the king a different method of interpreting the stars, and thus played a part in Sterling getting kicked out of the court. I find this to be more likely than the idea that the king is Behren because king is a fairly generic title for a fantasy story. If the title doesn't have a name attached, it really could be just about anyone. It could be King Alistair, King Foltest, or King Osiris for all we know. Astronomer, on the other hand, is more specific, especially as Night in the Woods is concerned. In the Night in the Woods universe, it usually refers to Adina, who has a whole network of stories about her. The one May's granddad tells May in the Longest Night supplemental game is just the last of those stories. There are many more, and perhaps this is how Adina got her start, by supplanting Sterling the Seer in the king's court. It's just a theory, of course, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. But honestly, I wouldn't have thought about this at all if it weren't for Scruff Bucket's art, so major credit to them for the very creative thinking here. Though the story is especially short, even by Dusk Star standards, the conversation that May and Mr. Chazakov have about Sterling is rather interesting and ties directly into the major themes of Night in the Woods. Mr. Chazakov asks May if there's a place in society for people like Sterling, people who time has passed by. May can either say that this is just how life works, or express sympathy for those in the spurned seer's position. But regardless, it's hard for me to read this dialogue and not think of the town of Possum Springs itself. Just as Sterling was once a well-respected member of the court, so too was Possum Springs once a thriving community, full of jobs and opportunities. But when the mines and factories closed down, Possum Springs quickly became obsolete, much like the outdated seer. And thus, the question is, what should become of people like Sterling or places like Possum Springs, the paragons of a bygone era? There's no easy answer. Even in other avenues, it's something our society struggles with. Look no further than aging professional athletes, who often struggle to find a new purpose as their stardom wanes, or even military veterans, who aren't always given the support they need to adjust to civilian life. Like all good fiction, the story of Sterling and the tale of Possum Springs and the greater narrative of Night in the Woods asks us questions, but doesn't provide us with answers, because such things should be up to us to determine. So I ask you, my friends, what should happen to obsolete things once they've outlived their lifespan? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to my Night in the Woods collaborators Wolf.Godwin, Allan Naslund, and Jordi, Jaen, Moreno. To check out all 3 of these incredibly talented creators, just follow the links down below in the description box. As mentioned earlier, special shout out to Scruff Bucket for allowing me to use their incredible art piece as the thumbnail image for this video. To check out their socials, just follow the links below. Big shout out to all my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Gustavo Balabi, Lil Caesar, Reed, Bethonian, Anna Novikova, Laura Parenti, Sean Bobby, Bogu, Trace de Asada, Vixol, Dorlaxon, and Junisov, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time, and go birds!